Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Ship in a Bottle, which is episode 12 of season 6 of Star Trek The Next Generation. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek as determined by my user polls. The episode to win my latest user poll for Star Trek The Next Generation is the 6th season episode, A Ship in a Bottle. So, in The Ship in the Bottle, the holodeck character of Moriarty, who is sentient, reappears and complains that Picard has done nothing to ensure that he can leave the holodeck, and in doing so, he meets with Picard, Data, and Barclay, in which he, unbeknownst to them, sets a trap for them and puts them inside a mini holodeck where they think he's taking control of the ship, but really it's all a simulation, and in an attempt to regain control of the ship, Picard gives his command codes, which Moriarty used to take control of the actual ship. However, Picard and Data learn of this, and they form their own trap, and they form a holodeck within a holodeck to trap Moriarty, who thinks he's succeeded in leaving the holodeck and is going off in the shuttlecraft in the real world, but in actuality they created like a micro holodeck to have him in so he can live his life thinking that everything's hunky-dory for him, where they get their ship back. So, I always loved this episode. I always loved it. The moment it first aired, in fact, when I saw the commercial for this, I was like, oh my god, this looks amazing. And when it aired, it was actually even better than I thought it would be. And so I've always loved this episode. This has always been one of my favorite episodes. It's never been like it's never cracked my top 10. It's more of a top 20 or top 30 area, but definitely in sort of the higher echelon of episodes. So this is, of course, features the reappearance of the character of Moriarty, who first appeared in the second season episode Elementary Dear Data. And this was like 4 years later because it's season 6. And so I had been waiting for this character to reappear because Elementary Dear Data did leave things kind of up in the air. Like it kind of left it kind of open-ended with the situation between Moriarty and Picard coming to a standstill, where he agreed to release the hostage and be put into storage, and Picard agreed to do some research on his behalf. Now, honestly, I never expected this to be followed up on, because there's a lot of like one-off episodes, especially in The Next Generation. I mean, and at this time I was also watching the original series, which is even worse, where there's a lot of one-offs where they say, oh, maybe one day we'll meet again, and they never meet again. And, I mean, there's rare examples like Khan, for example, but most of the time you never see these characters again, and it's just a one-off thing, self-contained. So that's why I was so excited when I saw the preview for this episode that they're actually bringing Moriarty back. It had been 4 years, and I never thought they would actually reconnect with this character. However, apparently there had been, throughout the years, a drive to reintroduce Moriarty because they liked him and they did want to follow up with him in the writer's room. However, legal issues prevented them from doing so, because if you'll notice, in the first and second season, they made several references to Data being interested in Sherlock Holmes and being a fan of Sherlock Holmes, and it accumulated in the episode Elementary Dear Data, where he actively went with Geordi and did all these holodeck programs with Sherlock Holmes in the holodeck. But you'll note that we never seen him do any further Sherlock Holmes holodeck adventures until this episode, and that had to do with what actually Jerry Taylor describes as a misunderstanding, because they believed that the family owns the rights to the Sherlock Holmes, the Doyle family, sued Paramount and wouldn't let them use any of their material anymore. But actually, they come to find out years later that their issue with Paramount was over a different production, not The Next Generation, and it didn't actually have to do with them, and that they were actually perfectly willing to let Star Trek use Sherlock Holmes properties as long as they, paid them royalties, which they did. They were more than willing, like, yeah, sure, we'll pay your royalties, and they so thus they were able to use Sherlock Holmes material. And so apparently they've been waiting to do reintroduce Moriarty, and do an episode like this. Now, so I was just happy to get to see this story followed up on, because it was left open ended. But what they actually ended up doing is this. To me, this is like a way better use of Moriarty, because I didn't actually. As much as I like the concept of the idea of the character of Moriarty in Elementary Dear Data, I didn't like that episode very much, because I thought the episode itself, much like season 2, was not very good. But it started off as being Data having adventures in the holodeck, and then all of a sudden it turned into a hostage situation, and then the hostage situation was resolved so easily. All Moriarty had to do is, hey, I'm alive. Can you, acknowledge that? And Picard's like, alright, sure, I acknowledge that. I'll just pop you in storage for forever. and to me that wasn't very satisfying. They had building blocks of a very, they had Moriarty, who's, a very interesting fictional character, who's supposed to be the super genius, who is impossible to defeat, and they didn't really do anything with that. They just had him say, hey, guess what, I'm alive. And that's it. Whereas here, they did utilize him, and grand old fashioned, they created really this whole mind fuck. I don't know how else to describe it, but the blending of realities, which I think is an amazing concept, and I love that they used it and with Moriarty, that they chose him to be the vehicle for this. If you don't know what I'm talking about the holodeck within a holodeck within a holodeck. That Picard, Data, and Barclay are roaming around what they think is real life, but it actually turns out to be a holodeck. And so they use that same trick on Moriarty to defeat him, where he thinks he's in real life, but really he's just inside the holodeck that's within the holodeck that he created. Which I think is absolutely brilliant. I think there's no other episode in the Star Trek franchise that pulls something off like this, or if it does, not nearly as well. Where it's kind of that blending of reality, especially using the holodeck, because if you know me, I usually don't like holodeck episodes, because especially Next Generation became a trope of trapped in the holodeck, and actually Voyager and DS9 didn't do it any better. It became a cliche, and it was the same thing every time. They were running some holodeck program of some 20th or earlier century that, the writers of Star Trek want to reminisce about, and the safeties go off as something goes wrong. They get stuck in the holodeck, and the safeties, which it's ridiculous that the holodeck is like a murder box. People treat it like it's like a recreation room. Oh, let's go fun, let's go hang out in the holodeck, not realizing how many times it almost killed them, because the safeties that are saving their lives seem to go offline like that. But of course, the real reason is plot contrivance, because every Star Trek episode has to have the threat of the week. And so if you have an episode about a holodeck, you need to make up a threat. And so usually it's, they get stuck and the safeties go off. And that's the threat. Now, there are some unique examples where they actually use their creativity and come up with something a bit more original than simply, we're stuck in the holodeck and the safeties go off. One example comes to mind is our man Bashir, where Bashir is running a James Bond-esque program where the safeties actually don't go off. It's just the fact that the consciousness of the senior staff is embedded in the program. So if Bashir messes up the program or it ends, then those people's lives will be lost, which is similar but different. And then there's other examples, I could get into the Fairhaven thing where nothing actually goes wrong with the holodeck, but that episode is just boring and sucks. But there's other examples where they find unique ways around this holodeck thing rather than simply, this thing like A Fistful of Datas, which was earlier this season, which is a very stereotypical, oh no, the holodeck safeties are off and we're trapped. But this is the best example. This is by far my favorite holodeck episode of the entire franchise. Easily, by far. And it is the most original, creative way, because it's not simply, because guess what? Safeties don't fail in this episode. They don't go off. That's not the problem. The problem is you have this super genius who's like sentient intelligence and realizes, where they are, that they're on a starship and everything, realizes he's a hologram, but he actively is fighting for his existence, and he feels like, and to be honest, I think he's kind of justified on being disappointed with Picard and feeling like he's not doing enough to help his sentience, because I think it's true. I mean, it seems like the concept of the holodeck characters leaving the holodeck, which I'll get to the mobile emitter shortly. I'll cover that later, don't you worry. But anyway, but at this point in the stage, the concept of holodeck characters leaving the holodeck is seen as impossible. And so, granted, this is a very sort of impossible situation, so I understand Picard sort of taking his time and putting their best experts on it. But simply just leaving him in the storage for 4 years without giving him any consideration. Now, apparently, he was actually experiencing the passage of time, which was a shock to Barclay and Picard. They had no idea that this would be the case. So it was worse than he would expect it to be. But still, it seems like, why couldn't, that little box that they ended up creating for him where he could live his life in a digital holodeck. It wasn't a physical holodeck, but it was a digital holodeck where he could just live the rest of his life. Like, they should have done that in the first place rather than just say, we'll just save you in storage and fuck off. So I actually kind of understand Moriarty's impatience and dislike for Picard, because I think he kind of has a point that he wasn't doing much. Now, granted, of course, he is the character is based off of an evil super genius, so he still has that embedded in this character, even though he insists throughout the episode, oh no, that's just the scribblings of a dead Englishman from centuries ago. No, that's what his character is based on. He definitely has that element to him, and I love how he uses that, but not for evil, not to try to kill people or master. He just wants to survive, and of course he creates his love of his life and gives her consciousness and wants her to go out in the real world as well. But of course he doesn't understand anything about 24th century technology, and so doesn't realize that asking him to come up with a solution in like a day is never gonna happen. It's not gonna happen. And so Picard has to trick Moriarty in order to save his ship, because as much as they try to appease him and do his wishes, he's asking for too much too soon. But I kind of also understand Moriarty's attitude of, well, if I died, and so what? Like, I'm just stuck in storage I don't want to be stuck in storage for another 20 years. But it seems like both parties maybe could have been better at negotiating. Yeah. I mean, this is something I think that should happen in Elementary Dear Data, and as against us, I think Moriarty's a little bit justified in not trusting Picard. So yeah, and I love the solution that Moriarty and the Countess think that they've gone out into the real world and they get to travel space, and I'm sure it's going to be accurate to real life because they have the Federation Starfleet database, and the program can base it off of that, even though Moriarty knows nothing about the Century, so they could just make shit up and he wouldn't tell the difference. But I'm sure they would keep it to realism just to keep it real, so it'll seem more real to him. Now, I want to talk a little bit about Reginald Barclay, because to my knowledge, and I believe This is the first episode that Barclay appeared in that he wasn't the main character. That this isn't a Barclay episode, where I feel like all the episodes he appeared in previously were. Like Hollow Pursuits was definitely a Barclay episode, and Nth Degree was a Barclay episode, and then that Realm of Fear, the Transporter one, was definitely a Barclay episode. And I think this is the next one, so the fourth one he appeared in after that. And Dwight Schultz is a fairly well-known actor, and so I think they didn't want to use him just to sit in the background and go, "Aye, sir," which is fair enough. But the writers said that they decided to include Barclay in this script because they wanted to have a character there who did not know who Moriarty was and wasn't there for the incident. Well, they could have just used Dr. Crusher because she wasn't there, but then they might have to acknowledge Pulaski's existence, which they barely did in this episode by saying, "Oh, I took someone hostage." Like, that's the only reference to Pulaski. This show really wants to forget she ever existed. But I mean, they could do something similar if they used Crusher. But then again, Crusher's not an engineer, so maybe she wouldn't have fit in as well in this scenario as Barclay. So I think they kind of used it as an excuse to bring Barclay back. Plus, like, I don't see the necessity of making sure that there's a character there who doesn't know Moriarty. Like, I don't see why. I mean, it's kind of cool to have, but I don't see why you need that. But I don't know. Again, I just think they wanted Barclay in there. Also, they said they couldn't imagine any other characters saying the final line of the episode that Barclay says, where he goes, "Computer in program." And I agree with them there. So if they want to do that silly line, which I don't know if is enough just to include a whole character for, but I agree it wouldn't work as well if it was anyone other than Barclay saying that. And it's also interesting that Barclay, of course, was one of the real people who were in this holodeck, because you had most of the Enterprise crew were fake holodeck characters, and you found that out. I didn't, like, I remember when I first watched this episode, I had forgotten who went in the holodeck originally, so I was surprised that Geordi was fake, because I thought Geordi was there, but he was in the holodeck originally, and then he was, like, an engineer talking to Picard and Data about what to do with Moriarty, but he didn't actually go to the meeting with Moriarty, which begs the question of why, and I think the answer is plot convenience, because they wanted LaForge in this reality to be not there, to be a holodeck character and not the real thing, and that way they could have, when they do have the real thing, they have LaForge and Riker, the ones who are like, trying to deal with the real Moriarty, and be like, "Give us a ship back," and LaForge is using his engineering expertise to try to come up with a solution, because if LaForge was in there with Data and Barclay, then they wouldn't have anyone in the real world to try to come up with an engineering solution to try to solve Moriarty's problem. So yeah, it just worked out better for the plot that way, I think, is the real reason why LaForge didn't get to the meeting. But whatever. Like, I still think that all worked extremely well. And I do love the whole thing of I can't understate how much I love the whole thing of the pulling the wool over the eyes, and this is another sort of badass Picard moment. Like, it was a really shocking moment to me. That was a big twist when Data, like, throws the thing at LaForge, and he catches it in the wrong hand, and he's like, "We're still on the holodeck." And when I first heard it, I was like, "What? What the fuck do you mean you're still on the holodeck?" And then they clarified, and they threw something at the wall in the holodeck. I thought that was an amazing reveal. Like, I did not see that coming at all. And then when they I kind of did see the double cross coming, though, because by then you already have part of the information. You know that the holodeck trickery is possible if you've already been introduced to it. And so when Moriarty is like getting everything he wants, I was like, wait a second, I see what's going on here. Picard's doing the same thing to him that he did to him, but that didn't make it any less awesome. It was still like, it's definitely, I love like seeing Picard outwit his opponents, which is why I think this is a much better use of Moriarty, because rather than simply saying, "Hey, I'm alive," you actually have a battle of wits and two people trying to outwit each other. And Picard actually, being the diplomat, finds a way to give Moriarty what he wants. kind of, sort of. Now, I want to talk a little, just very briefly, I want to talk a little bit about my fan fiction, because I had an idea if I ever wrote a Star Trek novel, and I was hoping someone else would write a novel like this, a non-canon novel. I think it would be very interesting to see Moriarty return and find out that where he would discover the fact, because he is a very intelligent guy, where he caught on to the fact that he was in a simulation, that he never really left the holodeck, and that he would be like outraged, like irate about this. And so I just had this vague story idea in my mind that somehow he would get his hands on a mobile emitter and come out into the real world and actually have a mobile emitter and be able to be in the real world for once and try to get revenge on Picard for tricking him this whole time and being like outraged and having this battle of wits. That's just as far as my idea has gone, but I thought that would be a cool idea personally. Now, speaking of the mobile emitter, so if Moriarty just waited, it turns out if he waited just another 5 or 10 years, how long is it since Voyager went home? More like 10 years. I don't know the exact amount. Maybe someone will tell me in the chat. But, I'm not in the chat, in the comments. But anyway, if he just waited a decade or so, apparently he would have been able to go out in the real world with the mobile emitter. The mobile emitter, of course, is 28th century technology, 29th, or was it 31st? I can't even remember. But anyway, it's from the distant future, which that's a Voyager issue, because I kind of feel like they kind of fucked up the timeline by introducing that technology way earlier, because it's no longer future tech, because now, like, when Voyager gets home, he's talking about spreading that technology to everyone, so they kind of fucked up the timeline. But again, that's a Voyager issue. The point is, he would have the means to actually exist in the real world had he just waited a bit, which I find is very interesting. And also thinking about sentient holodeck characters, because I won the Memory Alpha and they talked about the well-known sentient holodeck characters. We've got, of course, the Doctor, and then Moriarty, and then there's also Vic Fontaine. And I talked a bit about my review of the episode Bada Bing Bada Bang, which I think is exactly one of the 10 worst episodes in the entire Star Trek franchise. A lot of people disagree with me, and they, have the right to be wrong if they like. Anyway, and part of the reason why that episode's so terrible is because Vic Fontaine is a sentient hologram. He's a sentient being, just like the Doctor, just like Moriarty, just like Data. He's alive, he's sentient, and yet the guy who created this program just got sentience like that, like willy-nilly. Like, nobody ever discusses how amazing it is that there's a sentient hologram. It's just like, oh, some guy named Felix who we never see just created a sentient hologram. No biggie. Where the whole thing about Moriarty, it is a biggie. Like, Picard's like, this is astounding, this is amazing, the philosophical implications, but apparently like 5 years later some jackass named Felix can just write a sentient hologram character for no goddamn reason and then put in a program and that could have him killed in the race willy-nilly for no good reason, just to make the holodeck program more fun for the people who didn't even want that fun. Which is why the episode is so terrible, and freaking Vic Fontaine is so terrible, and I hate him. He's a terrible character. Alright. Anyway, you can check out my channel. If you've seen my other videos, you know how much I can't stand Vic Fontaine. So, I think what they did with the Doctor and Moriarty made a lot more sense. The fact that the Moriarty and Vic's existence, like, don't combine, like, they contradict each other, that's why I was thinking about it in this episode as well. Anyway, yeah, so I love this episode. I thought it was an amazing episode. I thought it worked out very well, having the different cast of characters and the sort of mind fucked with reality with Picard outwitting Moriarty. Thought that all worked very well. So my rating for A Ship in a Bottle out of 10 is a 9. Excellent. Close to a 10, but not quite there. But I absolutely love this episode. Absolutely love it. I think maybe it's not quite, it doesn't have the huge wow that a 10 rated episode would for me, but it's close because it's great use of a pre-existing character several, like Moriarty and Barclay, and great use of Picard outwitting someone. And I love the reality bending moment of the holodeck within a holodeck. It's just absolutely amazing. So that's it for my review of A Ship in a Bottle. Be sure to check out my channel as I continue to review all the Star Trek episodes that were voted for in my user polls. And you can check my channel out as I cover all things Star Trek, including Star Trek Discovery, and covering other shows like Star Wars: The Clone Wars, The Expanse, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks so much for watching.